You remember the 70s, don't you? The oil crisis that sent petrol prices soaring. The 3-day working week when Britain's lights literally went out. Strikes that crippled industry. And right in the middle of this chaos, British Leyland trying desperately to save an entire automotive empire with one revolutionary family car. The Austin Allegro was supposed to be Britain's answer to the Ford Escort and Vauxhall Viva, a modern, efficient successor to the phenomenally successful Austin 1000 at 100 that had dominated British roads throughout the 60s. Instead, it became something else entirely, a symbol of everything that went catastrophically wrong with British manufacturing in that troubled decade. The Allegro became the punchline of jokes about British cars, the automotive equivalent of flared trousers and Spangles sweets, a reminder of a decade best forgotten. But here's the thing that might surprise you. While the Allegro has spent nearly 50 years as the butt of every joke about 70s British cars, the real story is far more complex and far more tragic than the simple caricature suggests. This wasn't just another poorly built car from a struggling company cobbled together by incompetent designers. The Allegro represented genuinely innovative engineering that was systematically undermined by corporate chaos, devastating union disputes, and catastrophic quality control failures that would make modern manufacturers weep. Between May 1973 and March 1982, British Leyland built over 642,350 Allegros at their Longbridge plant in Birmingham. Hundreds of thousands of British families depended on them for the school run, the weekly shopping, the annual holiday to Blackpool or Bournemouth. Many genuinely loved their Allegros. Yet today, according to DVLA records, fewer than 200 remain on UK roads, a survival rate that tells its own damning story. What happened? How did a car designed by some of Britain's brightest engineers become synonymous with industrial failure? And were the critics entirely fair in their savage condemnation? If you lived through the Allegro era, whether you owned one, worked on one, watched them rust away on your street, or perhaps most tellingly, deliberately avoided buying one, you deserve to know the truth behind the mythology. Let's examine 7 facts about the Austin Allegro that challenge everything you thought you knew about Britain's most controversial car. Truth 1. The Allegro was actually more aerodynamic than it looked, but corporate meddling destroyed the design. Let's address the elephant in the room first, that ungainly, dumpy shape that made the Allegro look like a pregnant roller skate. The styling has been called everything from a space hopper on wheels to a squashed jelly mold. Even people who never saw one in person know about the controversial Quartic steering wheel with its squared-off shape. But here's what the critics missed and what history has conveniently forgotten. Beneath that unfortunate appearance was some genuinely clever aerodynamic thinking and the story of how brilliant design was systematically destroyed by corporate interference. Harris Mann, the talented designer responsible for the Allegro's final shape, didn't set out to create an ugly car. Far from it. His original design concept from 1968 was actually quite attractive. A sleek, wedge-shaped hatchback with clean lines that looked modern and purposeful. Mann had proven his abilities with other projects, and his initial Allegro sketches showed real promise. But corporate interference changed everything, transforming what could have been a handsome car into an automotive embarrassment. British Leyland management, desperate to control costs during their increasingly precarious financial situation, insisted on compromises that progressively destroyed Mann's design. They demanded more interior headroom, forcing Mann to raise the roofline and making the car look bloated. They insisted it accommodate the existing bulky heating system from the Morris Marina, rather than developing a new, more compact unit. This alone added significant height to the bonnet line. They demanded it use existing Austin 1000 100 doors to save tooling costs. They rejected Mann's hatchback configuration because management had decreed that only the Austin Maxi should have a hatchback in the British Leyland range to maintain its unique selling point. With each corporate mandate, with each cost-cutting measure, the design grew progressively worse. What emerged bore little resemblance to Mann's original vision. Yet even in its compromised form, The Allegro had a drag coefficient of 0.46, not spectacular by modern standards, but actually better than many contemporaries, including the Ford Escort Mark I. The rounded nose and smooth sides did reduce wind resistance compared to the boxier Austin 1100 it replaced. In an era when petrol prices were doubling seemingly monthly and rationing seemed imminent with queues at filling stations, this aerodynamic efficiency actually mattered. Motor Magazine's comprehensive road test of the Allegro 1300 Super in 1973 noted fuel consumption of 32.7 miles per gallon at a steady 50 miles per hour. Genuinely respectable economy for the period when many family cars struggled to achieve 30 miles per gallon. The infamous Quartic steering wheel, introduced on certain models in 1973, wasn't mere styling gimmickry or corporate madness either. Its squared-off shape, comprising 4 curves joined by 4 straight lines, similar to a television screen, was designed to provide better visibility of the instrument panel and more thigh clearance for larger drivers in what had become a car with limited interior space due to the raised floor and bulky mechanicals. According to Jeff Daniels' authoritative book, British Leyland, The Truth About the Cars, the Quartic wheel was originally designed by David Bachet for the aborted Rover P8 project and was brought to the Allegro by George Turnbull in spring 1972 as a supposedly avant-garde and high-tech solution to the visibility problem caused by the compromised interior packaging. In theory, the Quartic wheel made some engineering sense. In practice, it became a symbol of everything odd and misguided about the Allegro. When senior motoring journalists were invited to Longbridge in summer 1972 to preview the new car, they were unanimous in their distaste for this strange wheel. The criticism was so severe that British Leyland quietly replaced it with a conventional round wheel by October 1974, barely 18 months after launch, though some owners' manuals continued to feature illustrations of the Quartic wheel long after it had disappeared from production cars, adding to the confusion and reinforcing the image of corporate incompetence. Truth 2. The Hydragas suspension was genuinely innovative and could be brilliant when it worked. Here's where the Allegro actually deserves substantial credit and where its engineering genuinely shone. Its Hydragas suspension system was advanced technology that delivered a remarkably comfortable ride when functioning properly. This wasn't marketing hype or corporate spin, this was legitimate engineering innovation that put British Leyland briefly ahead of its competitors. Developed by Dr. Alex Moulton, the brilliant engineer who'd created the original rubber suspension system for the Mini and the hydroelastic system for the BMC 1100, Hydragas replaced conventional coil springs with interconnected fluid-filled units. The system worked by using a mixture of water and antifreeze as the fluid medium, with nitrogen gas providing the spring effect. Crucially, front and rear suspension units were interconnected on each side of the car through small-bore pipes, which meant the suspension could respond intelligently to both pitch and roll. When a front wheel encountered a bump, the interconnection meant the rear suspension could help absorb the shock, creating what engineers call a magic carpet ride. When it worked properly, and this is the critical qualifier, the Allegro floated over rough British roads with a suppleness and refinement that embarrassed cars costing twice as much. Contemporary road tests consistently praised the ride quality with genuine enthusiasm. Autocar's detailed assessment of the Allegro 1,500 inches, March 1973, described it as outstandingly comfortable and noted that the Hydragas suspension deals magnificently with poor surfaces that would have other cars crashing and banging. Motor Magazine agreed, stating the ride was absorbent and controlled, with none of the float or vagueness associated with soft suspension systems. Even critical journalists admitted the Hydragas system was impressive when functioning correctly. The problem, and it was a devastating problem that eventually destroyed the system's reputation, wasn't the fundamental engineering concept. The problem was execution, quality control, and maintenance. Hydragas units could develop leaks, lose pressure gradually, or suffer from interconnection faults, where the pipes became blocked or damaged. When they failed, the car would sag pathetically on one corner, giving it a drunken, lopsided appearance that became another endless source of ridicule. There goes another Allegro with a flat tire. People would joke, except it wasn't a flat tire, it was failed hydraulic suspension that the owner probably couldn't afford to repair properly. Worse still, many independent mechanics didn't understand the hydraulic system and couldn't repair it correctly, even when owners brought their cars in for servicing. The system required specialized equipment and knowledge that most corner garages simply didn't possess in the 1970s. Owners who took their sagging Allegros to garages unfamiliar with hydraulic technology often had conventional coil springs crudely fitted. Instead, a modification that destroyed the ride quality that was genuinely one of the car's few genuine strengths and left the Allegro handling like a shopping trolley with a wonky wheel. Truth 3. Quality control was even worse than you remember, and the statistics are truly shocking. If you owned an Allegro during the 70s, you probably have at least one horror story about build quality. Tales of trim falling off, water leaking through door seals, electrical faults that defied logic. But even allowing for selective memory, nostalgia's tendency to exaggerate, and the natural human inclination to remember the bad more vividly than the good, the reality of Allegro build quality was genuinely, spectacularly shocking. The statistics tell a story of industrial collapse that would be almost unbelievable if the documentary evidence didn't survive. The Allegro arrived during British Leyland's absolute darkest period, when industrial relations had completely collapsed into open warfare between management and unions. Quality control was virtually non-existent. Cars literally left the Longbridge factory with missing components, incorrectly fitted trim, misaligned body panels that wouldn't close properly, and electrical systems that worked only intermittently. This wasn't the exception, this was standard production reality. Autocar magazine's long-term test Allegro, purchased as a customer car in 1973 to ensure it received no special treatment, developed a truly staggering litany of faults during its test period. The heater failed completely during winter, door locks jammed requiring force to open, the gear lever came loose from its mountings, water leaked into the interior during rain, the alternator failed, and various trim pieces simply fell off. This wasn't an exceptional example of a particularly bad car. Subsequent correspondence from readers revealed this was absolutely typical of the Allegro ownership experience. The warranty claims statistics tell an even more damning story that British Leyland tried desperately to suppress. Internal company documents reveal that warranty claims on early Allegros ran at nearly double the industry average, costing the company millions of pounds. A comprehensive survey by which Consumer magazine in 1975 rated the Allegro as one of the least reliable family cars available on the British market. More than 40% of owners, think about that staggering number, reported significant mechanical or electrical faults within the first 12 months of ownership. 40%. Nearly half of all Allegro buyers experienced serious problems with a brand new car. Strike action made everything catastrophically worse. The Allegro was built at British Leyland's Longbridge plant, which lost thousands upon thousands of production days to industrial disputes throughout the 70s. The situation became so dire that cars sat partially assembled for weeks at a time, gathering dust, suffering water damage from leaking roofs, and deteriorating before they were even completed. When strikes finally ended, components were fitted carelessly and hastily to make up production numbers and meet desperately needed sales targets. The workforce, thoroughly demoralized by years of management incompetence, facing constant redundancy threats and working in increasingly difficult conditions, had virtually no incentive to take pride in their work. Can you really blame them? Perhaps most damning of all, British Leyland's own internal quality audits from 1975, which were later leaked to the press causing enormous embarrassment, revealed that company inspectors were finding an average of 7 defects per vehicle at the end of the production line. 7 significant defects on cars that hadn't even left the factory yet. And these were only the defects that inspectors caught and documented. How many more went unnoticed and ended up with customers? Truth 4. The sportier Allegros were genuinely quick, but nobody wanted to believe it. Here's something that might genuinely surprise you, especially if you remember the Allegro as simply a slow, underpowered shopping car. The sportier Allegro models were genuinely quick by mid-70s standards, not just adequate, actually quick enough to embarrass supposedly sporting rivals. The Allegro 1750 Sport model, introduced in September 1974 with British Leyland's E-Series overhead cam engine in twin carburetor 90 brake horsepower tune, could reach 60 miles per hour in approximately 10.2 seconds according to contemporary road tests, and achieved a top speed of 103 miles per hour. To put those figures in context, that performance put it virtually on par with the Ford Escort RS 2000, considerably faster than the standard Vauxhall Viva, and quicker than many cars with supposedly sporting credentials. Motor Magazine's comprehensive road test of the 1750 Sport in September 1974 praised its surprising performance, noting that the Allegro can show a clean pair of heels to most family saloons in its class, and recorded the standing quarter mile in 17.7 seconds, a respectable time that many modern family cars would struggle to match. These were genuinely competitive numbers for a family car with a 1,748 cubic centimeter engine. The lesser-known Allegro 3, introduced in 1979, with the overhead cam 1,800 cubic centimeter engine producing 82 brake horsepower, was even quicker in some configurations. The twin carburetor 7HL model could reach 60 miles per hour in approximately 10 seconds and achieved a genuine 100 miles per hour, top speed faster than the contemporary Ford Escort 1.6 and many other supposedly sporty competitors. The 1979 Allegro Equipe, a limited edition model with distinctive orange and black striping, twin carburetors, and special badging, was British Leyland's belated attempt to create a hot hatch competitor. With its 90 brake horsepower and improved aerodynamics from a front chin spoiler, it could genuinely keep pace with early hot hatches. Only 2,700 were built, making it rare today. The fundamental problem was that by the late 70s, the Allegro's reputation was so comprehensively damaged, so thoroughly destroyed by the quality disasters of the early years, that performance variants couldn't possibly overcome the stigma. British Leyland could have installed a Ferrari V12 engine and people would still have mocked it. The 1750 Sport, which should have been a credible competitor to the Escort Sport and could have attracted younger buyers, sold poorly and was quietly dropped. The Equipe barely made an impact, despite being genuinely quick before the entire Allegro range was mercifully discontinued in March 1982. Perception had completely overwhelmed reality. Truth 5. The Allegro's commercial failure nearly bankrupted British Leyland and cost British taxpayers billions. The Allegro's spectacular commercial failure had consequences that extended far beyond automotive history or embarrassed British Leyland executives. This was about jobs, communities, and ultimately about whether Britain would continue to have a domestically owned car industry at all. British Leyland was Britain's largest manufacturing employer by far, and by the mid-70s, it was losing money at a truly catastrophic rate. The Allegro was supposed to reverse that decline and restore profitability. Instead, it accelerated the company's collapse into what became the largest industrial bailout in British history. Development costs for the Allegro exceeded £50 million, an absolutely enormous sum in early 70s money, equivalent to well over £500 million today. British Leyland's ambitious projections expected to sell 250,000 units annually and achieve profitability within 3 years. Reality proved devastatingly different. First-year sales reached only 114,000 units, well below the break-even point. By 1975, with the British economy in deep crisis, inflation running at over 20%, and the Allegro's reputation in complete tatters, sales had collapsed to under 80,000 units annually. The financial hemorrhaging forced direct government intervention to prevent total collapse. In 1975, the Labour government under Harold Wilson effectively nationalised British Leyland, injecting hundreds of millions of pounds in taxpayer money to prevent bankruptcy and mass unemployment. The Ryder Report, commissioned by the government to examine the company's future, specifically identified the Allegro's commercial failure as a critical factor in the crisis requiring state intervention. Here's the truly shocking part that gets forgotten in the mists of history. Between 1975 and 1988, British taxpayers provided over £3 billion in subsidies and bailouts to keep British Leyland and its successor companies alive. £3 billion of public money. A significant portion of that enormous subsidy can be traced directly to the Allegro's commercial failure and the resulting crisis of confidence in all British Leyland products. You could credibly argue that Britain's most expensive car wasn't any Rolls-Royce or Bentley, it was the Austin Allegro, once you factored in the taxpayer cost of keeping its manufacturer afloat. The Allegro sold approximately 642,000 units over 9 years, a fraction of the 2.1 million examples of its predecessor, the Austin, 1,000, 100, over 1,000, 300, sold in 11 years. This wasn't just disappointing, this represented catastrophic commercial failure for a car that was supposed to save the company. Truth 6. Many owners actually loved their Allegros, the silent majority who had good examples. This might be the most controversial truth of all, the one that challenges the established narrative most directly, but it needs saying loudly. Many Allegro owners were genuinely satisfied with their cars, and some even loved them. Not ironically, not as a joke, genuinely appreciated them. If you were fortunate enough to buy a well-built example from a good production period and maintained it properly, the Allegro could serve you well for years. This truth gets lost in the mockery, but it deserves recognition. The Austin Allegro Owners Club, still active and thriving today more than 40 years after production ended, preserves dozens of well-maintained examples and organizes events where owners celebrate their cars. Club members consistently praise the comfortable ride quality, the surprisingly spacious interior for such a compact car, the good driving position that was a genuine improvement over the 1,000, 100, and the modest running costs. Many report covering high mileages, some well over 100,000 miles, with minimal trouble, assuming they avoided the quality control disasters that plagued early production. Contemporary owner satisfaction surveys from the period tell a more balanced, more nuanced story than the harsh historical reputation suggests. A 1979 J.D. Power survey of British car owners found that Allegro satisfaction ratings, while admittedly below average, weren't catastrophically low. Approximately 60% of owners reported being satisfied or very satisfied with their purchase. That's not impressive compared to rivals, but it's hardly universal condemnation. It means more Allegro owners were satisfied than dissatisfied. The fundamental problem was that the 40% who had genuinely bad experiences were very vocal about them, appearing in consumer reports, writing letters to newspapers and magazines, telling friends and neighbors, and they had every right to be angry. If you were unlucky enough to buy one of the many badly built Allegros that suffered from the quality problems, your ownership experience was genuinely awful. Constant breakdowns, expensive repairs, embarrassment, frustration. But if you were fortunate enough to get a good example, perhaps one built during a brief period when quality control was actually functioning, when the workforce wasn't on strike, when components were properly fitted, the Allegro could be a perfectly acceptable, even pleasant family car. Comfortable, economical, practical. The tragedy is that British Leyland's catastrophic inconsistency meant you were essentially gambling when you bought one, Russian roulette with your hard-earned money. Truth 7. The Allegro's failure fundamentally changed British car design forever. Its legacy lives on. The Allegro's spectacular, very public failure taught British car designers and engineers lessons that echo through the industry to this day. After watching the Allegro systematically destroyed by corporate interference and quality problems, British engineers became far more protective of design integrity and infinitely more focused on manufacturing standards. The Allegro became the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you compromise too much. When British Leyland's successor companies, first Rover Group, then eventually MG Rover, developed new models throughout the 80s and 90s, they obsessively focused on build quality and studiously avoided the kind of styling by committee corporate interference that had ruined the Allegro. The Rover 800, introduced in 1986 as a joint venture with Honda, showed what British engineers could genuinely achieve when given proper resources, adequate development time, and freedom from destructive interference. It won multiple quality awards and competed successfully with German imports for the first time in years. The Allegro also demonstrated the catastrophic dangers of rushing development and launching half-baked products. British Leyland had desperately pushed the Allegro to market before proper testing and refinement, desperate to replace the aging Austin 1100 and generate desperately needed revenue. Future British car programs, including the highly successful Rover 200 series and the Land Rover Discovery, took significantly longer development periods with far more comprehensive testing regimes. The industry learned painfully that launching a poorly developed product destroyed brands faster than delaying launch ever could. Perhaps most significantly and most enduringly, the Allegro demonstrated that reputation, once comprehensively lost, is nearly impossible to recover. By 1976, just 3 years after launch, the name Allegro had become genuinely toxic. British Leyland could have fixed every single problem, built every subsequent car absolutely perfectly, achieved German levels of quality, and still struggled to overcome the reputational damage. This harsh lesson influenced automotive naming strategies for decades afterward. When companies needed fresh starts, they created entirely new brands or model names rather than trying to rehabilitate damaged ones. The Austin name itself was eventually dropped in 1987, tainted by association with products like the Allegro. So there you have it, 7 substantial truths about the Austin Allegro that significantly complicate the simple, popular story of British automotive failure. Yes, the Allegro was undeniably a disaster. Yes, it thoroughly deserves much of the savage criticism that has been heaped upon it over the decades. The quality problems were real. The styling was unfortunate. The missed opportunities were tragic. But the real story, the complete story, involves genuinely clever engineering, like the high drag-ass suspension, that was systematically destroyed by corporate chaos and quality failures. It involves promising technology undermined by strike action and industrial warfare. It involves talented designers like Harris Mann, whose work was compromised beyond recognition by cost-cutting accountants. It involves innovative engineers whose brilliant concepts were negated by catastrophic production failures. It involves a workforce asked to build world-class products while their entire industry collapsed around them, facing redundancy, working in deteriorating conditions. And it involves customers who deserved far, far better than they received from a company that was supposed to represent British engineering excellence. The Austin Allegro wasn't just a bad car in isolation, it was a painful symptom of everything fundamentally wrong with British industry in the 1970s. Brilliant designers, systematically hamstrung by penny-pinching accountants, innovative engineers, whose work was negated by appalling production standards. Workers thoroughly demoralized by years of incompetent management and impossible circumstances. And customers, ordinary British families, who deserved vehicles they could depend on, but instead received products that became national jokes. If you owned an Allegro, worked on one at a garage, assembled them at Longbridge, or simply remember them rusting away on the streets of 70s Britain, I'd genuinely love to hear your stories in the comments below. Were you one of the fortunate owners who got a good example and enjoyed decent service? Or did you experience the quality nightmares that destroyed the car's reputation? Do you think history has been entirely fair to the Allegro, Or has the mythology and mockery overshadowed the more complex reality? Was it really as bad as people remember, or has time exaggerated the failures? If you enjoyed this detailed dive into controversial automotive history, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It genuinely helps us continue producing this kind of thoroughly researched content. There are many more controversial classics we need to examine with fresh eyes, proper research, and a commitment to truth over mythology. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth about automotive history is always more interesting, more complex, and more human than the simple legends we tell ourselves.